You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Hi, Justin.
Good morning, Allison.
How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing better today. Yesterday was a bit of a struggle.
What happened?
Well, I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but the night before, I mistakenly took my morning pills instead of my evening pills.
Oh,
Which,
no.
Whatever, I don't know what it was, but boy, that messed up my sleep.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So
what was yesterday like for you?
Yesterday was just a slog, just like moving through cement, just like head propped up with my hand on my desk, getting through work. It was, it was rough.
Aren't you so glad you still work at home?
Yes. Oh, completely.
Can you imagine if you were like in a cubicle or office or wherever you usually are, like falling asleep?
Yeah. Well, and even like driving to work, like I probably wasn't in a good state for that either. It was, but I took the correct medications last night and slept great. And so this morning I feel like a new person.
Good.
So that's great.
I have a friend who used to work for some sort of social service agency. So she had an office that locked because sometimes she would have like confidential meetings.
Yeah.
And she literally had a sleeping bag under her desk.
Oh, wow.
And when she needed to, she would lock her door and pull out her sleeping bag and take a nap, like a little power nap.
Yeah.
And then roll it back up and unlock her door again. And I'm sort of like, that's like a power move right there.
Yeah,
I mean, you know that she was more effective after she took that nap. Like we all need sleeping bags under our desks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better today.
Yeah. How about you? How was your, I guess, yesterday or week, or how are things going for you?
Yeah, things are going pretty well. I actually started coaching some caregivers.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is exciting because, like in my old world, I was a coach, and in my new world, I'm trying to focus more just on caregiver support and advocacy. And so I've combined the two and started, had my first coaching session with a caregiver this week and have another one lined up for next week. And so,
oh, that's great.
Yeah, it feels really like an amazing combination of my old world and my new world. And just, it feels really exciting. So that was kind of a highlight of the week. A lot of fun, like negative space things that are happening that now that I have more of the time to just let it happen.
Right.
Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So still trying to get into the groove of like, what does my day look like? And a little bit shocked that I used to do all of this and I worked for 40 hours a week. I'm not sure how I did that.
It sounded like you hit a wall or something and you were pretty exhausted this week.
I was pretty exhausted. Well, and part of that was because I built a patio last weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm not handy. And, there's a lot of ways in which I am strong. Physically is not one of them, but I got an idea in my head. It was because of IKEA. IKEA was like, hey, we make these tiles and you put them on cement and makes your patio look nice. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do, IKEA? Put them on dirt. And then that turned into all the things.
Right.
So it's been a weeks long project. And last week was like, over the weekend was probably like 18 hours of me doing physical labor, things that I don't really know how to do and I'm not qualified for in any way. So basically I'm struggling to just slow down.
Yeah.
With my new free time, I'm like, you know what I should do? Build a patio.
Right.
So I'm still working on that, on the balance.
Right.
Working on the
balance.
Hard. But it is nice to do something different. And
for sure. Yeah.
It's very different from the 40 hours of Zoom I used to do. So,
well, and it's going to feel great when it's all done and you can sit out there and,
I know.
I built this.
I hope that happens before the snow flies here in Minnesota. Well, that's the goal.
You got a little bit of time.
Maybe. Someone's like, you got to get a space heater or something so you can enjoy your little patio as long as possible. So, so it was a good week.
That's great.
In one of the conversations I had with caregivers this week, something came up that I was hoping that you and I could talk about.
Okay.
It's a person who just a few months ago, her partner received a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. And so this caregiver is sort of starting to realize like, this is a long-term diagnosis. Right. I mean, it's right there in the title, right? Chronic. And so, she's sort of coming to grips with like, her life is now forever changed.
Yeah.
Since this diagnosis. So it just made me think about the different kinds of caregivers that there are, like that almost always it seems like there's some kind of triggering event.
Right.
right? Like something almost always happens, a diagnosis or an accident or something that means that someone needs care.
Yeah.
And that sometimes that turns into a short term, whether that's a week or a month or 6 months, whatever, a short term need for care. And then sometimes it ends up like with you and me, we both are very much in this chronically, not just because we're married to the people, right? But because their illnesses are such that it's going to be long term.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking this week that there's like there are definitely things about being a chronic illness caregiver or a long-term caregiver that are different and are more challenging than the challenges of being a sort of a short-term caregiver. Does that make sense?
That does.
So I was thinking that maybe that could be something we could dig into a little bit today.
For sure. Yeah. I know that. Yeah. Like you said, with caregiving starts with a triggering event, and then, there's all these variations of what that ends up looking like. I have a hard time sometimes kind of thinking back that, I don't know, with Sarah's, there wasn't necessarily a triggering event. It was kind of like a slow decline kind of into it. And I don't know how that makes my experience different, how it ended. I don't know, but it wasn't like, one day something's very different. She's extremely sick and everything changed that day.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
But there very much was after a period of time, it's like, okay, this is not a temporary thing.
Yeah.
Or this is at least like going to take some time to figure out.
So even before maybe a diagnosis happened, there was a moment or a time that you realized like, oh, this isn't a blip.
Right.
Like this is a thing that we're going to be dealing with for a long time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think it wasn't, not that it was like, okay, this is something that we're going to be dealing with for the rest of her life. It wasn't that yet, but it wasn't also like, a few more doctor's appointments and, we'll have this, we'll kind of be on the mend kind of situation. And so there's that kind of intermediate sort of phase where it's like you go from the realization that like, this is not we didn't have a diagnosis yet at this point, but it's not something where, here is a diagnosis and there's a plan and, you work through the plan. And then, in a lot of cases, cancer, things like that, you become a caregiver and then you go through the treatment and then hopefully you emerge from that, the person you're caring for comes out the other side of that and you're no longer a caregiver. There's an end to your journey. There's also times when they don't make it through and then you're also no longer a caregiver. And, I know people with both of those realities, and like, that's a whole nother, like, that's got to be another whole hard thing to face, being a caregiver and not knowing which door you're going to exit, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I have actually had the realization that because Sean's illness is chronic, it's genetic, it's not going anywhere, that essentially like for the rest of my life, I will either be like a caregiver or a widow, right? Those are my two doors.
Yeah.
There isn't a different one. And wife is in there in both of those situations.
Yeah.
But there is no other side of this mountain that ends well.
Right.
And so those are my two titles. Like, that's it. Those are my only two options that I have. And I think that's a piece of this chronic caregiver role is knowing that that's it. Like, we're in it till we're not. And we don't want to not be in it because we know what that means.
Exactly.
But it's really hard to be in it too.
It's extremely hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how you relate to this, but for me, I feel a great deal of pressure to stay healthy such that because this is a lifelong thing, like to avoid the situation where, Sarah is still chronically ill and no longer has me to be there to take care of her.
Yeah.
And boy, that's a lot of pressure.
That is a lot of pressure
to put on myself. Yeah, we got deep real quick here.
We sure did. We just dove right in.
Oh, wow.
I think what you just said, I think I've thought about that. We've talked about that, like in the short term, sort of like, all the statistics say we're doomed, right? So everybody's like self-care, because like if you get the flu, if you get whatever, like you're not gonna be able to take care of her. But that's a whole deeper level that you just brought up of like long term.
Yeah.
Like you gotta stay on your game. And I think that's because, tell me, and I don't know enough about chronic fatigue and POTS and migraine and all of the things that Sarah lives with, but though, to my understanding, none of those are something that might end her life early. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, none of those are conditions that she will die from.
Okay.
They are, and they're not necessarily degenerative either. In that sense, they're just like, this is our life.
Yep.
And so she needs care from here on out. Now, we have had, there have been improvements, a couple different treatments that have come along that have made improvements, but, and that's not to say that, and certainly I hope that this can happen, that there can be breakthroughs, and whether that's just treatment to, very much improve her quality of life. I feel like I don't let myself think that there will be a cure. Right. That just feels like a little too much.
Yeah.
Hope.
Yeah.
And too much of too much to wish for. But it's just, I don't know. It's a long, for us, it's day in and day out. It's kind of the same thing. And there's ups and downs with, her energy level and all of that, but it's kind of like looking far out to the horizon, and it's just a lot of the same.
Yeah.
For a long time from here. And that can feel real overwhelming. That can feel real, just like, I don't know, like helpless, like we're just stuck in this.
Yeah. Yeah. That I'm glad you brought that up, because that's different than the way because this, I'm sure I've talked about here before, like, Sean's already passed. He's 42. He's past the median age of death for his disease, which is 33. And so I try not to think about the long haul, right? Because it's more about this, like, certainly, again, we hope that he's already beat the odds a million times, and we hope that continues to happen. And so I think of this as a long term, but it's a different kind of long term, right? Yeah. Like it's long term, and then it's not going away until it does. But yours is like the entirety of your life. And so now you're like young and fit and able to do all the things, but I can see from what you're describing that, like, for you to think about you being 60, 70, 80, you know what I mean? Or whatever age, like, and then still having to do this really intense caregiving, and potentially more so because, like, she will also be aging and, just have those needs, that could feel really heavy as you picture this long term, and that just like the general aging that you will both do anyway, that
and
you
added to that, something we've been talking about, and it comes up that from time to time, is like, we don't have kids to pitch in when we get old to take care of us. And so it's like this additional level of like, I don't know what that's all going to look like.
Right.
Who will be there, or, how we need to plan for that.
Right. Which feels like such an extra, like, stake in the heart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because of the disease, you weren't able to have the kids that you wanted to be able to have. And now you don't have the kids to be able to help you with the, like, oh, so sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, let's just collective sigh here for a minute.
Yeah, for sure.
I think about when I was thinking about this person who talked to me the other day about this new diagnosis of chronic fatigue. The image that I drew was like a little, like, vertical line up and then a horizontal arrow, just an arrow.
Yeah.
Like a not ending arrow.
Right.
Right. And I think it's that, even like having the visual, like me drawing that arrow felt really something. I don't know. It's like it is not ending.
Yeah.
Right. I know, the first thing that happened with Sean after he got his diagnosis is he had a bone marrow transplant. And with his disease, it's sort of these two-pronged, like, it causes bone marrow failure and it causes cancer.
Right.
we were brand new to the disease. We didn't really realize those 2 prongs yet because they were just like, you have this thing, you need a bone marrow transplant.
Mm-hmm.
We went right into transplant. And I remember afterwards, people, because the transplant was terrible, but successful.
Yeah.
And afterwards, all these people kept saying, you're over the hill, you're over the mountain, you're over the hump, you're over all the things, right? You're on the other side. And it was so hard because yes, we had made it over that mountain, but we're like, the disease does not go away.
Right.
And so, you know, even when you were talking about a cancer caregiver who hopefully their person goes into remission and all of those things, I do just want to throw out there that I feel like even if your person is in remission, you are always a caregiver.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think the vigilance and the worrying and the side effects that I feel like it's very rare, unless maybe it's like a car accident, they break their leg.
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean? I feel like for most of us as caregivers, like it's always going to be part of our role, even if it isn't as intense or acute.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I know. I do. Yeah.
So I think that, like, for me, I always felt a little triggered when people would say, well, you're over the hump. What?
Yeah.
That hump?
It's like people don't know how to like relate to chronic illness. And that's something that we faced early on. And I've talked about before. It's like people assume that you get sick and, you know, you either get better or you don't, you improve or you decline. There's not a, like, you just stay sick. Like, what do you mean? Like, this is just how her body is now.
Right.
And, you know, there's a lot of things with that. You know, sometimes there's a drop off on like even support with that, because people just, they're used to a triggering event. Everyone rallies, but it's like, as it wanes and there's no updates to give. You know, we went through step 4 of the 8-step treatment plan.
Right.
Like, here's how she's doing now. It's like, no, she's still in bed. It's been 2 years. She's still in bed.
Right.
You know? Like, that just drags on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so much about supporters, like the people who want to help the caregivers and the families. And, you know, I'm fortunate to be friends with the folks who created the IanaCare app that we've talked about so much. And that I highly, highly recommend. And they were saying the other day that the majority of the teams that people create on the app are for cancer diagnoses. And I think, and that makes sense, right? Like that's a thing. And then people understand that name and that title, and people like rally and they understand we're going to have 35 days of radiation or whatever it is, right? People rally and they have these big teams around cancer. Yeah. And they said the next one is Alzheimer's, and then Alzheimer's ends up being more of like the family members.
Yeah.
Are using it.
Yeah.
But I think you bring up such an important point about like the chronic illness thing. So like if you get a diagnosis of chronic fatigue or another thing that is an ongoing thing, like I don't know that, I think it would be harder to rally supporters because they're like, well, when do I give you a casserole? Do you need a casserole? Like, I don't know. And like, yes, Justin needs casserole. He's doing a lot of things, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like people, like you said, people don't understand it. And when they don't understand it, then they don't support it well. Either initially because they don't get it, but then certainly not in the long haul, you know?
When with people like having trouble understanding it for a number of years, I think we started to get a sense of what Sarah might have, but we didn't have a name to what she had.
Yeah.
We didn't have it, or an official diagnosis. And even if we had, it wasn't something that like has that societal like body of understanding as far as what it is, what it looks like. This is all of this stuff about it, other than, you know, which I've mentioned before, like the fibromyalgia commercial with the, you know, woman who's in pain and then she takes a pill and then she's canoeing or whatever. Right. Like, and that's not. And so, yeah, from a support standpoint, it's hard. But I think, we're in a better situation now where we kind of have some more of that built in living with Sarah's parents, which helps a lot. But there's, just the, like, it's hard. It can be hard on some days. It's just like, I don't know, when Sarah's having a bad day and it's like she's in pain, kind of sleeping through the day, and here I am kind of like waking her up enough to, hook her up to an IV bag, and then, like, this is my life.
Yeah.
And just that, like, this is my life and this is going to keep being my life.
Yes.
And that's that's just a real, there are days when that's just a real hard reality to face. Where that long picture is tough. And that's where I think, I don't know, that's where I think we can, at least for Sarah and I, when we can have like small things to look forward to or to kind of build into our lives, things like, when the blueberries are ripe and we go out and pick blueberries, like that's a thing we look forward to, like they're done for the year, so we're looking forward to that for next year. And it's like having those small kind of things like that kind of build in a little bit of variety, or other stuff than just facing down decades of chronic illness.
I think even so much about like the platitudes that we all like to use, right? This too shall pass. No, it won't.
Yeah, right.
All the cross stitch things.
Yeah.
I have this author, Jen Hatmaker, that I really love, and she talks a lot about the season that you're in, and she talks about it in relationship to parenting. But like, you're not always going to be in the season where they're toddlers and they, throw fits in the middle of the store. Like, this is a season.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to use that, and sometimes that is helpful to me. Like if we're in like a hospital season,
right?
Like it won't always be like this. And I have a good friend who has 2 kids under 2, and that's what she's always saying. Like, it won't always be like this. And so I just need to know. But then sometimes I hear that and I think, but it kind of will for us, like,
right.
So I think even all the things that we have built in to tell ourselves, like, you can do anything for a week, you can do anything, like, just get through it, like all these little, embroidered pillows don't apply when it's like there isn't another side, a different
there's
side.
No getting through it. There's just keeping going. Yeah.
Right. There's like slogging through, like literally through, but not through to like a shiny rainbow on the other end. Like it's just slogging through to the rest of it. Speaking of cross stitch, I think it was when Sean was doing radiation that somebody sent me the most amazing cross stitch thing ever that said, "This is terrible. Keep going." Yeah. And I feel like, that's kind of what we can say, right? Because it's like, we don't have an option, but I like the acknowledgement that this is really terrible. And you just got to just keep like one foot in front of the other, but I think it is hard to know, like you said, like, this is my life. And there are good moments and there are hard moments, but it's not like, won't it be great when she's done with this treatment? No, she won't. And then who knows, right? We can both hope that there will be cures in our lifetime and all of that. And won't we be delighted if that happens? And I think that we need to prepare ourselves that might not be the case, and that, like, this is the long haul for both of us.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, like, so in watching you and your kind of caregiving journey, you have this situation where, like, Sean has these like chronic conditions, or like, and he has Fanconi anemia, which is like an ongoing thing. And so you have that baseline kind of thing, and all of the, like his hip and things like that are a result of that are just, this is life. And then on top of that, you keep having to deal with these like acute medical situations, whether that's, like a new cancer that, like, okay, now we have to go through the whole treatment cycle for that. And it's how is that? Like, it just seems like that would be, I don't know. Is it, when you do have an acute thing that you're working through, does that like give you focus that you can just kind of like, okay, it's easier to keep going right now because this is a season like of this caregiving journey. And like, I know that this season, what this, there's something to get through here.
For sure.
Versus like when things are from the cancer side more stable, you're still in that just like long.
Right. Yeah. Good question. I think that, yes, in some weird, strange way, that when there's an acute thing going on, it's not that it's easier, because I don't really want to use the word easy in relationship to it, but it is more, like you said, focused, right? So it's more like the surgery is on this day. It will look like this. The medication will be this. You know what I mean? There's more of a plan. There's a little more predictability, even though it's a terrible thing to predict, right? You can tell, like, we know we're going to arrive at 5 a.m. and the surgery will be at 7 and we'll be home by 3, and then he'll be in pain for this many days, right? So there's something about that. I think there's also the good thing about, quote, good thing about the acute moments is that people understand surgery.
Right.
So I can say to our supporters, surgery day on Thursday, and then the support comes because we're super fortunate and have like a really amazing support system.
Yeah.
You know, we get a lot of support, whether that's texts or foods or gift cards or whatever. So that really helps because it's an acute moment that people understand. I think that the more chronic stuff feels lonelier.
Yeah.
Because people don't see that, you know, like I'm not necessarily, I'm gonna post and be like, he just got so exhausted on a walk that I have to go get the car.
Right.
You know, to go pick him up. Like, that's not a thing that someone's going to send me a gift card for. But yet it was in some ways even harder because it was an unexpected thing that I just had to deal with. So I think with the chronic pieces, sometimes I can almost like get lulled into moments of like, look at us just living our life. And then it's like, bam, he can't get around the block and I have to go get the car. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's funny that you say that, because when I was picturing again this arrow that I drew for this friend of mine, because she was like, well, we're just still dealing with the new crisis of this diagnosis.
Yeah.
But then all these other little crises are happening too. Right. And so the picture I drew for her was sort of like the arrow up and the arrow over, you know, continuing on you know, into infinity. But then also under that horizontal arrow, little like bloop, 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 right? Because it's like we are constantly living in this world of chronic illness. And that doesn't mean that that's the only thing, because other things pop up along the way, you know? So we're just like double loaded.
Yeah.
Oof.
Well, yeah. And then you throw a pandemic in for,
and then there's that
18 months. And boy, that wears you down.
I know. Quick side note, I was noticing the other day how we had an episode called Emerging from the Pandemic. And I'm like, oh, weren't we so cute? Wasn't that so cute that we thought that? Oh, silly Allison and Justin.
It felt like we got to poke our head above water for a little bit.
Just a little hot minute.
I'm glad we were able to do that.
Yes.
But
it's true. It's true. I think too about like the moment of sort of recognizing that this is a long-term thing. So like for you, you said like for you, it wasn't like immediate. And it was somewhere between the first moment that maybe Sarah started not feeling well and between the diagnosis, somewhere in there, you sort of realized like, oh man, we're in this for a while, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you feel like? Yeah. What happened? Like, how did that come to be? And what did it feel like when you like realized that?
I think it probably was when she kept declining and, you know, reached that point where she was, you know, basically bedbound, and I was having to help her shower, and, you know, and that went on for multiple years. Somewhere in that time period, it's just like, okay, this is life now.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a day somewhere in there where it's like, okay, like I am a caregiver like this for the rest of her life. Like, but in that, like, as low as things got, it was like, okay, this is like, because I mean, I don't know, on some level, I had to like accept that this is what it was. And like, that was part of being able to face that every day, I guess. It's part of.
Was it hard? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think it's what I was going to say is it's part of, and we've talked about how hope can be hard, risky, or dangerous to like keep hoping for things to improve. And I think somewhere in there, it was like there was that realization that like, this isn't going to get better. And so like that realigning of my like mental approach that, okay, this is long term. Like what do I need to do? What do we need to do to set us up for the long haul?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder about that because I've come across a few caregivers who it's sort of like everybody else can tell this is going to be a long haul, but maybe they're not quite ready. They're not quite there yet. I can remember super clearly being at the valet counter at the hospital where I've spent a lot of time over my years. And like we had a parking pass, like a monthly parking pass, because we were like, we are here all the time.
Right.
You know? And so the woman in front of me, they were trying to convince her that she should get at least a weekly parking pass, if not monthly, because she had been there so much and the valet guys were seeing her every day. And she just kept saying, no, we're not here for a long time. Like we're almost done. Like, you know, and it was like the valet guys could see it. Like I, as a stranger, could see it. And, but she was just like, it was almost like by buying a monthly pass or a weekly pass, she was giving up.
Right.
Or she was not ready to say like, this is a long-term situation.
Yeah.
I have another friend who has been caring for her mom for, I think, about a year. And yesterday we were chatting and I actually mentioned her. I said, you know, I am doing this caregiver coaching now, if you'd ever want to take advantage of that. And she said, well, I'm still in the phase of like, how long is this going to last?
Right.
And I kind of wanted to be like, friend, I think it's been at least a year. Like, and you're calling me from the doctor right now. So I don't think that the end is like in sight, you know? And so it's an interesting thing. And I wonder like what that is and like what for the caregiver, like why there might be the hesitation. I suppose it might be like for this friend of mine, like she doesn't want to admit that maybe her mom is going to be sick long-term.
Yeah.
And need her, like, so it might be a little less, some part of like, she's not ready to admit that's going to be her role, but she maybe also isn't ready to admit that her mom's condition isn't temporary.
Yeah, it could definitely for people like in those situations, some sort of coping mechanism or like just that's a door that they don't want to have to open and process. Because I mean, there's an enormous amount of emotion that comes with like this is a long-term thing. Like there's grief around that in you know, big waves. And so I think to keep going, to not, I mean, if that's how they're keeping going at the time, I can see that like right now it's just how long is I get that.
I just wonder like what you're right. I get that. Like once a person acknowledges and says like, this is a thing, like I'm in this, she's in this, you know, I can imagine there are levels of grief and like, that's a whole door that you just opened. And I wonder if people who are sort of these acute short-term caregivers or think that that's what's going on likely aren't telling other people that it's happening, then they're not getting the support that they need. You know what I mean? It's like they're just like going at it alone because they're like, well, I'm just doing this thing. It's just like no big deal. It'll be over soon. And then no big deal, it'll be over soon turns into weeks and months and years that they're doing this thing that, you know, they're not acknowledging and then they're not getting support for, you know?
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Being a caregiver for years, not really acknowledging or owning that, not owning, but not fully acknowledging what I was doing, not sharing, talking about what I was doing. And then as thus getting to the point where it's when support was desperately needed and just like not having kept people in the loop or not having people be aware of what was going on. That's a real like, oh, hey, you know, the last 4 years or 3 years or whatever, like now things are bad. I need help. Kind of, I don't know. It's a hole that you slowly dig yourself into or you can.
Right.
And then it just feels like it's gone. What do you do?
Yep. Yeah. I think about that so much that it's sort of this like double layer, like part of it is what the caregiver is doing, part of it is what the supporter is doing, and that they have to work together because the caregiver can be asking for support. But if the supporters are like, why?
Right.
You're all fine over there. Then they're not going to do anything. And same thing, the supporter could be like, hey, I'm here to help you. And if you're like, why? I'm not a caregiver. Then, you know, it has to be able to match up in order for it to work.
Right.
When you think about that, like what are some what are some ways that you feel like, I'll pose 2 questions. You can choose which one you'd like. Okay. Both how do you, like, this is terrible, keep going, right? How do you keep going in the midst of it all? Or how do you feel like supporters listening can support the people in their lives who are caregivers for people with chronic illness?
Okay. Well, we'll start. How do you keep going? How do I keep going?
Yeah.
I just do. It's the only, it feels like the only option in a lot of, sometimes is just, I know that if to not keep going is to like stop providing the care that Sarah needs.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I have to just keep doing that. Like that need is there every day. So there's not another option.
Yep.
As far as making that bearable or like not being overwhelmed by that, I feel I'm incredibly fortunate that Sarah and I have an amazing relationship, and I'm caring for someone who I like, who is my person.
Yeah.
And so it's like, we repeatedly fall back to like, as long as we're still laughing, we're doing okay kind of mentality.
Yep.
And so it's that, that helps me keep going.
Yeah.
Is that worse?
Was there anything like, and I'm sorry to throw an additional question in there, but when you said like at one point you realized like, okay, this is a thing, this is going to be long term, and that you had to make some mindset shifts. Was there anything in that moment that you like did or realized or thought that could be helpful for us to hear about, that when you were like, okay, this isn't going away, now I need to like think like this or do this or change this? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I really wish I did have something from that. That's from, I don't have a lot of recollection of like what went through my mind during some of those really hard years. I think I like mentally just kind of, I don't know if I've blocked out stuff or just wasn't retaining memories and information. It was just a like in the thick of it in that period of time. And so I really wish I did have like something to say that would be helpful other than I think the longer I took to make that mental shift, I think it was, I don't know, the longer you take to make that shift, I think the harder that shift can potentially be. Because you have this momentum like, okay, this is something we're working through, we're going to get through this kind of thing. And the longer into Sarah's decline that went, when I finally was like, no, this is long term, it was a greater the difference between like getting what getting through it looked like and that reality was like increasing as time went on. And so like it became a harder, the further down the road that moment occurred, it was a bigger shift, a bigger like, wow, a bigger like bigger waves of grief, all of that.
I'm picturing, I'm just sort of, I don't know what it is with me in lines today, but I'm picturing sort of like what you're sort of the hopeful line sort of going diagonally up, but then her decline going diagonally down, and then just like this gaping hole getting bigger and bigger as it goes between those two lines. Yeah. Something that I was talking to someone about this week was about, in those moments, when you realize like, this is it, like we're in this, is taking stock of like, what are the things that I do currently that I do because I have lots of extra energy and I have lots of extra time and it's fun or it's fluffy or it's whatever, but it's not really needed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I look around and I'm like, look at all those people doing that thing. And I'm like, maybe I used to do that or I wanted to do that, but like, it's like, what are the priorities, right? If you can boil it down. And I think even thinking about like in your household and whatever, like, what are the things that like, if our little family can only has enough energy to do like 3 things, like what are those things? And then can the rest of the things be like maybes?
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. Can we delegate that other thing? Or can we like say, you know what, we're not going to have a beautiful yard anymore, or we're not going to whatever, because we don't have the time and the energy for that like we used to. And so how can priorities be sort of reshuffled, and really so that when we know that this is happening, you don't have the time and energy to do all the things you used to do. And that takes a while sometimes to recognize, but the sooner you can recognize it and can reprioritize, the better. Yeah. I think. So it doesn't feel like, well, now we don't get to do anything. No, now we get to do the things that are really important. And some of the things that we used to maybe weren't important. We just did them because we had that time.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that, you get to that point where you have that, what becomes important is very clear, and you have to focus on those things. And I think there's still, certainly there's mourning around some of those other priorities that you
for sure
have to drop too.
Yeah.
Things that maybe didn't need to be done, but you enjoyed them. And
yeah. Right.
It's certainly, I think, part of the, like, this long-term chronic illness caregiving is kind of having to reimagine what the life you want to live looks like, kind of, imagining, life is going to be smaller. The things we're going to be able to do are going to be a much more like narrow focus. It's not, we're not going to take a trip to Europe. We're going to, maybe this year we can drive 30 minutes to the ocean and like have a picnic,
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, that's a thought that that sounds like an exciting, fun thing. And it's,
Yeah. I think when first you say smaller, it sounds like, well, that's going to be really depressing. Right. But I think instead it's like, instead of lots of things all over the place, it's sort of like fewer, more special things.
Right.
Like that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And in some ways would probably be an even more like beautiful, miraculous experience for the two of you. You'd even appreciate it more than this big European trip, right? Because it's something that you would really be looking forward to, and that you maybe thought before it couldn't happen, and all of that. So I think smaller is sometimes like might sound like it's a negative thing, but I think it also can lead us to like enjoying those little micro moments, and
Yeah. So the other question you had asked was about supporting long-term caregivers. And I guess a piece of advice there is, for myself as someone caring for someone with chronic illness, I'm not always like, there's rarely like an update on like, Sarah's health kind of situation. And because it's like, well, it's still this, it's still this, it's still this, like I may not talk about it or be sharing it as much. And so if you haven't heard any update, it probably doesn't mean that things are any better.
Right.
And so don't take that as meaning that help is not still needed, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important, if you're supporting someone in that situation, to be a little more proactive and not be sitting there ready for an acute situation to arise so that you can pitch in.
Yep.
To show up out of the blue.
Yeah.
And just be like, hey, I'm going to bring you a dinner this week kind of situation. Or, here's a, gift card for a place where you like to go shopping. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
totally.
Or just, here's a bouquet of flowers, or here's a card, I'm thinking about you. Just stuff like that to keep them knowing that you're there. Yeah, because it's also continuously being in a situation where you're like, I don't know, continuously asking for help is hard, and it's just another thing that you're just feel like you're constantly doing. Yeah. And that just wears you out.
And I think I agree with all of that 1,000%. And I think also that when there isn't an acute thing, I feel less able to ask for help.
Yeah, for sure.
So if it's just a Tuesday and we haven't had anything regular happen, but I'm like, I sure wish someone would mow the lawn. Like I feel a little weirder asking someone to mow the lawn, because it's sort of like, why? Although I'm sure none of them would think that, right? But that's what I think when there's nothing acute happening.
Right.
And so I love that. And we have this delightful friend in our life who used to be a Fanconi anemia caregiver who lives nearby, and will sometimes just like put a bag of my favorite potato chips in the door.
Right.
or throw a gift card to an ice cream shop in the mail slot.
Nice.
And it always says like, no need to respond and just thinking of you. And it's always like on a random day.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that so much. I mean, it's nice to have stuff on the big days, but the big days are also really big days. And sometimes you're like, I can't deal with a flower delivery, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And so sometimes it's like in those other times when we're not being so flooded with support. And again, I realize I'm very fortunate to have days when I even am flooded with support. Not everyone has that.
Yeah.
But it's the unremarkable days that I'm still doing the hard thing that feels really good when that's acknowledged.
Yeah, it does.
So yeah. Those are good advice, good pieces of advice. Yeah. Ooh. I think I need a nap.
Yeah.
Thinking about this long term.
Yeah,
it's terrible. Keep going, right?
It's a big topic.
It is a big topic. But I'm glad we got into it.
Yeah.
One last piece of clarification, if you could, for me. I know I've been referring to it as chronic fatigue, but I also know that there's a new and different term that you sometimes use.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, as a little PSA, like, as a caregiver for someone with that, do you prefer the new term? Like, what?
Right.
I want to make sure I'm using it correctly.
So one thing is, it's usually if someone, chronic fatigue is a symptom, and like chronic fatigue syndrome would be the diagnosis. And so that's kind of one thing to keep in mind, especially with something like chronic fatigue that hasn't always been taken medically with the most seriousness. The other term that is also used more lately is myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is a mouthful.
Right.
And you'll see it often as ME, and you'll see it written a lot as ME/CFS / chronic fatigue syndrome. And so, yeah, I don't know as far as which one to use. That's kind of, I would defer to how the person with the condition or with the syndrome wants to define it. But I think I would avoid saying just chronic fatigue. Would be kind of my.
That's good to know. I'm sorry. I should have asked that 45 minutes ago. Does Sarah have a preference? What does she?
She prefers ME, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, I'm glad that we have each other as we go through the muck.
Yeah.
The long-term muck. And I appreciate that we are able to just go so deep in these conversations and dig into some of these hard topics. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's been great to have this space to do that with you. So
yeah. All right. Here's to another week.
All right. We can do it.
We can. All right. We'll see you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.